Hey, Gary here. Welcome to Book Mob, episode 30. Today I'm going to be talking about Anna Funder and her new book, WIFEDOM, Mrs. Orwell's Invisible Life. Now, I think this book is written in the same sort of historical vein as, say, Norman Mailer's Executioner Song or Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, where real people, real events are interpreted, researched, and then put into a sort of narrative that the author, and in this case Anna Funder, in order to tell I wouldn't say, it's not a fictionalized account, it's a purely self-researched and self-determined account of someone's life. Now, in this story, you have the invisible life of Eileen O'Shaughnessy, who died before Orwell did, and a very accomplished person who obviously supported George Orwell throughout his tough career. It wasn't like they were living the high life. They were both very dedicated to the causes that they followed, particularly, with Orwell serving in the Spanish Civil War and getting shot in the throat. And Eileen basically went over to Spain during the period when there was a lot of confusion and division within the Communist Party, and basically Funder thinks and states that through letters and through biographical examination that Orwell was kind of like a child, that he sort of was a bit, pixelated. He wasn't fully engaged in what was going on around him, that he was extremely selfish, extremely misogynistic, totally unloyal. He wanted to, again, this is again from WIFEDOM, that he was a sexual predator, that he had such a sort of intense selfishness that he literally was blind to the world in his inner circle. Like, he didn't understand how things happen. They just happened for him. Now, there must be some element of truth in that, but when you, and look, WIFEDOM's brilliantly written, it's fascinating, it's engaging, and it is totally worth a read. But by the end of it, you do see that whatever legend has grown up around George Orwell, I mean, you've got the man, you've got the books, and you have the history and the biographies, and now in 2023, more is revealed through Anna Funder's book that perhaps we should spend more time considering not the legend behind the books. And maybe, I don't know if Anna Funder is saying don't read his books anymore because of all these nasty character traits that have that she has reflected on through George Orwell's turbulent and tough career. I mean, I've been reading Orwell since school when I was introduced to him for the book 1984. And I think just recently there was, or it's coming out, a book called Julia, which is now an account of 1984, but told through the character Julia, who was the lover of Winston Smith, and how both of them, betrayed each other in order to keep the party going. But that's another story. So what I'm saying is, it's not people say this is revision. It's not revisionist history at all. It's just a take on a particular writer who happens to be George Orwell. And when you go through the novel, Anna's biography, told in a narrative form that I guess is deliberately written so that people will read it. It's a mass read book. because it's engaging, it's entertaining, it's interesting. Yet at the same time, it kind of lays. I mean, it sort of kicks the hell out of George Orwell's character. When I mean character, I don't mean the book character. I mean his personality. It's very hard to consider him. By the end of the book, it's very hard to consider George Orwell someone that you might be interested in reading due to the fact that Anafunda has come across and said, this man was a pig. His misogyny was, it was just incredible. His selfishness and his inner world was so terrible that, and this is a personal opinion, because when I've read a number of George Orwell's books, I never considered the writer. I don't sit there reading and consider, am I going to read this because this guy was a bastard or this guy was a prick? No, I read the story, and then obviously the only reason I would have read Wifedom, other than because I know that Anafunda wrote Stasiland, which is a fascinating book and a brilliant book. Well, so obviously I was drawn to it because of Anna, and because of the idea of Mrs. Orwell's invisible life, Eileen O'Shaughnessy. And so I'm not disappointed that I read it. I guess it has thrown light on the the legend or the myth around George Orwell, that he's just a man like any other man. He's a writer like any other writer. And are his books separate from the man? Of course they are, because he's dead. George Orwell is dead. He lived his life, and like all of us, he made decisions, made choices, was not, but I never thought that the point of lifting someone else up, and that's Eileen O'Shaughnessy, which the book is about. I just, lifting someone else out at the expense of making sure someone else is squashed into the mud. I mean, I find it difficult to see the rationale behind that, because literally there's almost nothing in this book that speaks positively of George Orwell as a man. As a writer, yes, but obviously, she's done all the research, she's spoken to all the people, she's read all the biographies, she's read the letters, and her research has brought her to this point where, in order to lift Eileen up, she felt that, George Orwell must be down, because there's no sense of partnership or equality between the two, other than the fact that, according to Anafunda, basically there is no separation between writer and book, and author and biography, and character. It's all very easily explained by, misogyny and hate and selfishness. So even in their own marriage, between Eileen and George, there's this sense that both of them cheated with other partners. But you never get that sense that there's no evidence that Eileen cheated. There's just insinuation. But for George, he cheated. He was nasty. He treated women terribly. He treated his partners terribly. And it's an exhausting read, because George Orwell has been reduced to, I guess, a piece of shit. And it means that you have to separate. There's a desperate need to separate George Orwell from his books, because at the end of the day, if you read Orwell in the past and you decide to read him now, if you've sort of read Funda's biography, are you going to be able to read it with the being stand away from what is contained in this book? Now, the irony is, again, I thoroughly enjoyed Wifedom. It's so well written. It's beautifully laid out. It's got letters. It's got Eileen's letters, sort of photocopied and typed out on one pages. So it's there is a lot of work and a lot of effort has gone into this, and I'm sure that Eileen worked very hard to guide, to help, to support, to to be a partner with George Orwell. And yes, there's no doubt that 40, 60, even 80 years ago, no one gave a damn about anyone else in a writer's life. All they cared about was the book, and the myth and the legends that have grown up around individual writers. Stems from history. Whether or not they're true or not, it doesn't matter. But what actually is the result? They're lying in. They're all dead now, but their books survive. So when you read the book of these writers who have been, as in George Orwell's case, is basically you feel at the end of WIFEDOM, you're going, do I really want to read George Orwell? Because he really is. He really is presented as someone who's a nasty piece of work. And I'm affected by reading WIFEDOM because I enjoy George. I've always enjoyed George Orwell's books, but I never knew anything about George Orwell. I didn't know about him as a man or his character. And now it's been presented to me that his behaviour was wrong. He had no real sense of others. He's cheating. He's basically not a good man to know. Whereas, all I'm saying is that think about it from this one point of view. He decided to go to Spain to fight the fascists, and that's living in a trench for months, shitting in your shoes and eating food out of cans and standing in all weathers, having bombs drop. I mean, that's tough. I mean, it does need character to be able to. And not only that, he got shot in the throat and, survived. And yes, Funda talks about how Elaine, I don't want to get the name wrong here. I keep forgetting. Eileen, I should say, not Elaine, Eileen. Works so hard to, provide food, knowledge, information because she worked very hard with the communist organization in the city. And she did visit the front, and, she did meet George while he was on duty in the front lines. And yes, I'm sure she did a lot of good things. But at the end of the day, we have a man who's written books that have changed the landscape of literature. He was a huge voice, and it continues to be a huge voice, an anti-authoritarian writer who has, taken basic. Like Animal Farm is a great book. I mean, it's like a children's story that's turned into a nasty horror story but has so many elements of truth and culture and society thrown in. It's probably one of the most well-known books in the world. And Eileen O'Shaughnessy, no one knew who she was. And I mean, basically no one knew who she was because her support for George Orwell was, I guess, done in the realm of a partnership between a man and a woman who got married and wanted to be together. But the evidence that George Orwell was a cheating, lying, misogynist pig kind of, does affect the way people will read George Orwell's books in the future. So, like I said, well-written, well-researched, fictional, non-fictional, history, narrative, whatever. I don't even know what to call it. I mean, Stasiland was a fabulous book. That was that's a book that's a real tough read, but great, well done. And WIFEDOM is going to be remembered as the book that stood up against George Orwell's legacy, the myth. Who knows? And how do you feel after reading it? And how I felt after reading it will probably be different, which is good. But I must admit, it left a bad taste in my mouth about George Orwell, that's for sure. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I'll be back soon with another episode. So just leave a like or a comment or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks a lot. Bye.